Perfect. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone again. This is Jack or KJ, and I'm the Director of Product Marketing here at SafeBreach. I wanted to thank each and every one of you for taking the time to attend our interactive session today. Before we get started, I wanted to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared with all the registrants and attendees after the event is complete. It would also be available on YouTube on our channel as well as on our website. Just a quick reminder, and I'll keep reminding everyone of this. At any given point of time, if you do have any questions about the content or the SafeBreach product, please do send them to us via the Q&A function in Zoom webinar. We will be answering the questions right after the presentation is complete during the Q&A session. With that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So as you can see over here, today's webinar highlights the original threat research conducted by our presenter, Orr, and the SafeBreach Labs team. This webinar highlights how Orr was able to discover multiple zero-day vulnerabilities that enabled him to turn very well-known EDR tools into next-generation wipers. Just FYI that this research was originally presented at Black Hat Europe in October of 2022. So let's learn a little bit more about our December. My bad. Apologies. So December of 2022. So it's very fresh off the press. Let's learn a little bit more about our presenter, Orr. Orr is a security researcher in the SafeBreach Labs team. He's only 23 years old, and it's an amazing research that he's done really amazing research. And he got his start in the cybersecurity field during his service with the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. His research primarily focuses on Linux, embedded systems, Android operating system, as well as Windows internals. Over to you, Orr.
Yeah, so let me share my screen. Can you see it clearly?
Yep.
Okay, great. Just
swap
switch
the mode.
to presenter mode. Great. Can you see the agenda slide?
Yep, I can.
Okay, so let's begin. So as KJ just mentioned, today I'm going to show you how I managed to turn EDRs into malicious wipers using zero-day vulnerabilities that I found. And let's see exactly what we're going to talk about more specifically. So we're going to start with the initial research goal that I had in mind when I started this research. Then we'll talk a bit about wipers in general, understand what they are, how do they work, and what they're used for. Then we'll deep dive into the technical aspects of the research process itself and see how I managed to find zero-day vulnerabilities that enabled me to create the Aikido wiper. So the initial thought that I had when I started this research was a very simple one. It was to create some sort of a next generation wiper. But in order to create a next generation of something, you need first to understand how this thing works currently. So I needed to understand how wipers work today. So let's talk about wipers in general for a bit. The first thing you do once you when you want to understand how something works or get its general definition, of course you go to Wikipedia and look for its definition. So that is what I did as well. And according to Wikipedia, we can see that a wiper is a device used to remove rain, snow, ice, water fluid, water, or debris from a vehicle's front window. But as you know, that is not the wiper that we're going to talk about today. And today we're going to talk about the wiper malware. And according to Wikipedia, again, in computer security, a wiper is a class of malware intended to erase the hard drive of the computer it infects, maliciously deleting data and programs. And I'm sure that's no surprise to any of you if you came to attend this talk, but I just wanted to make this clear. But why are wipers even used? So they are usually used for some kind of an offensive act, like a war, in war. And an example for that is like the war that we currently see between Russia and Ukraine currently. And so I also attached a few examples in here. We can see that both Ukraine and Russia were attacked by wipers, and both Israel and Iran were attacked by wipers. And basically, everything that we hear on the news about rivalries between countries is also expressed in the cyber warfare. But let's start talking about the real technical aspects of wipers. So I'm sure that most of you, when you hear the word wiper or wipe, you probably also think about the word deletion or delete. But there is actually a crucial difference between the two. So before we move on, we must understand it. When a certain process calls the delete file API function in Windows, then what happens is that the kernel goes to a certain place that is called the MFT, which stands for the master file table in the NTFS file system. And in this table, the kernel just marks a certain entry as free. Now, this entry is just a pointer to the actual file content. So marking the entry as free does not really delete the content of the file. So it's still there on the disk after the file is deleted. And that is the difference between a wipe and a deletion. When we say that we wiped something, we mean that we also deleted the content itself, and by that we made the file completely unrestorable. But there is actually a way to escalate the deletion to a wipe, and that is because freed MFT entries can be used again. So that means that a new created file can potentially be given a freed MFT entry. And then when this new file is written, then its content overwrites the content which was left on the disk from the last deleted file. But when I try to understand how wipers nowadays overcome this gap between deletion and wipe, I saw that most of them choose to not even try and delete files, but instead straight ahead go and overwrite the files directly. By overwriting the files, they make sure that they actually delete the content of the file itself, and by that they achieve a wipe. We know a lot of modern and famous wipers that use this technique, like we can see in the list in this slide. And of course, if a wiper wants to delete important files on the computer, then a lot of files can be deleted or written to, in this case, only with admin's privileges. So in order to get a really good effect for a wiper that uses this technique, this wiper needs to run with admin's privileges. Another famous technique that a lot of modern and modern and famous wipers use is the drive destruction technique. Now, this technique basically means that the wiper opens the hard drive as a device and starts writing directly to it. By that, the wiper can run over the boot sequence, can override the boot sequence, it can override structures that belong to the NTFS file system, and it can also overwrite files themselves. But again, this technique also requires administrator privileges because, of course, no unprivileged user should be able to ruin the system in such a way. But I want you to take a moment and understand something important that I understood after looking at these techniques and any other technique that I found online for a wiper. And that is that each of these techniques are obviously initiated by the wiper itself. So that means that if, for example, we'll open process monitor from sysinternals on a computer, and we'll see that there is a certain process that opens and writes to a lot of files, then we can understand that this process is probably a wiper, because the action, the technique itself is done by the process of the wiper. But what if, just what if, we can create some sort of a next generation wiper that will allow us to do all this stuff and wipe these files without using these obvious APIs? And what if this very same next generation wiper will also be able to operate with the permissions of an unprivileged user? That is what I wanted to do. That was my idea. And that is also when Aikido came up in my mind. Now, Aikido is a martial art that specializes in using the power of the opponents against them. But how is that even relevant to this talk and to wipers? So EDRs have a very special superpower. They have the power to delete almost any file on the system, no matter the privileges required to delete that file. And they must have this ability because potentially any file on the system can be malicious. But before we understand exactly how we're going to Aikido EDRs into deleting our target files as an unprivileged wiper, we first need to understand exactly when and how EDRs choose to delete files. So from what I saw, it of course depends on the configuration. But the most spread out and default configuration that I saw is that EDRs choose to delete or quarantine files that are surely malicious automatically. So for example, mimikatz. Now some EDRs do that and scan the files and find them to be malicious when they are open. Some other EDRs do that when the files are closed after they were written to. Some EDRs do both. And most EDRs offer an option for a custom scan. And now that we know when they choose to delete these files, there is something crucial that I understand in this stage, and that is that even as an unprivileged user, I still have a certain amount of control over the deletion process of the EDR. And that is because even as an unprivileged user, I can create a malicious file. So by creating a malicious file, I'm triggering a deletion. Then all that I'm really left with to do is to trigger the same deletion for the wrong file. So of course, the first idea that comes to mind is to maybe just add some malicious content to an innocent file and then wait for the EDR to delete it. But this idea has a few problems in it. And the first one is that files which I will want to delete, important files, some of them will require administrator privileges to write to them. And so I can't use it if I want to run as an unprivileged user. And also, this idea requires opening and writing to a lot of files. And that, if we look at the API calls, looks a lot like the file override technique. So I had to give up on that idea. And the second idea that came up is to maybe just point the EDR towards a different path to delete, while it still thinks that it deletes the original path. So these vulnerabilities are usually achieved using links. And in the cybersecurity field, we are familiar with a lot of link vulnerabilities already. Their category is called CWE 59, and there were so many link vulnerabilities in the past that Microsoft has realized that they must create a special user right for users in order to create symbolic links. This user right is called the Create Symbolic Links user right, and it's given by default only to administrators. But I would like to tell you that there is another type of link available on Windows and NTFS, and that is junction points. Now, from a high-level point of view, a junction point, or in short, junction, and a local directory symlink work exactly the same. And junction points do not require any special permissions in order to create them. So I knew that if I want to use links to my advantage here, I should probably use junction points. But I still needed to understand exactly how and when. Now, at this stage, I understood that there are two primary events in the process when the EDR chooses to delete a malicious file. There is the event in which the malicious file is being detected, and the event in which the file is really being deleted. Now, between these two events, there is a potential gap. If I will be maybe able to do something with a junction point between these two events, I will be maybe able to point the EDR towards a different path. These vulnerabilities belong to the type of TORCTO vulnerabilities, like you can see in the headline, and that stands for time of check and time of use. And for this scenario, something more suitable will probably be something like time of check and time of deletion. And I also have added an example for you to understand exactly how we can use junction points between these two events in order to maybe point the EDR towards a different path. That was the initial idea. So let's say, for an example, that we want to delete the file endis.sys. Now, endis.sys is a driver that is part of the Windows operating system, and it is contained inside the folder C Windows System 32 drivers. Like you can see here on this slide on the left, it has the target mark on it. So if we are able, as an unprivileged user, to create a path which is very, very similar to the path of the real endis.sys file, just with one crucial difference, and that is this temp directory that you see. And that is a directory that was created and is controlled by us, the unprivileged user. So if we create this path ctemp Windows System 32 drivers endis.sys, and then make a privileged program, in our case, an EDR or an antivirus, to try and delete this endis.sys file, this decoy file that we created, then if right before the deletion, we can actually delete everything from within the temp directory, and the temp directory instead make the temp directory to be a junction towards the C drive, then the same path that the EDR or the antivirus tries to delete, ctemp Windows System 32 drivers endis.sys, actually leads to the original endis.sys file. So that is exactly what I try to do. I try to create mimikatz in the path ctemp Windows System 32 drivers endis.sys. Then immediately after I created the file, delete the mimikatz file, delete all the directories it is contained in until the temp directory, and then instead create the ctemp junction that points towards the C drive. Then wait for the EDR to delete the real endis.sys file. But doing that has led me to a lot of failures, and I saw two primary behaviors by EDRs. The first one was that some EDRs just understood that the threat of mimikatz does not longer exist on the disk, and there is no longer a need to delete the file. So after I deleted the mimikatz, they just did not delete anything else. The second behavior was that some EDRs just had a very, very good grip on the file right after I created it. And so I was not able to delete the Mimikatz file that I created, and so I was also not able to delete the temp directory and create the junction instead. So at this point, I understood that I should probably somehow expand the window of opportunity, the gap between these two primary events of file deletion by the EDR. And what I thought of was to maybe prevent the EDR or the antivirus from being able to delete the malicious file that I created. And I did it using the technique of catching handles. So as you probably know, when we create or open a file in Windows, we must specify the file sharing mode. The file sharing mode specifies whether other processes other than the current process that creates or opens the file should be able to delete, write, or read the file. So what I did was that once I created the Mimikatz file, the malicious decoy file, I held the handle to it open, while the initial code specified a file sharing mode of only read. So that has prevented the EDRs and antiviruses from being able to delete that file while it was still open. And so they started to pop up messages to tell me, hey, buddy, we need you to reboot your computer in order to fully remediate the threat, because they knew that if the computer will be restarted, then the handle will be closed. So let's see how they implement this feature. What I saw are two primary methods. The first one is to just use a built-in Windows API for postponing a deletion of a file to after the next reboot. And an example for an EDR that did it is SentinelOne, while the second method that I saw was just self-implementation inside the antivirus or the EDR product itself. So that means that the product just saved a list somewhere with files to delete after the next reboot. And then after the next reboot, it went through the list and deleted all the files. But let's take a closer look at the built-in feature in Windows for postponing a deletion of a file to after the next reboot. So this is done using a function that is called moveFileEx. If this function receives a flag that is called moveFile delay until reboot, then this function requires administrator privileges. Once this flag is received to this function, what it actually does is that it goes to a certain registry value that is called pending file rename operations. And then to this value, it adds an entry, which is the path to delete after the reboot. But the most surprising thing about EDRs and antiviruses using this feature to postpone the deletion is that pending file rename operations blindly follows junctions. And so do other self-implementations of EDRs and antiviruses. So overall, this has led me to combine the two techniques we just talked about with abusing the gap between the two crucial events in deletion and handle catching to one complete process that has allowed me to delete almost any file I want on the system. Now, if we come back to the same example with the endis.sys file, so we can see that the process starts with creating a malicious file in the path ctemp Windows System32 drivers endis.sys, while endis.sys is a malicious file. Then hold the handle to that file with a file sharing mode of read only and forced the antivirus in EDR to postpone the deletion to after the next reboot. Then, when they gave up, close the malicious file, delete it and delete the ctemp directory, and instead create a ctemp junction that points towards the C drive. Then reboot the computer and the endis.sys file in this example is gone. By that, we've achieved our two what-ifs that we talked about from the beginning. And I promise you that any edge case that is coming up right now in your mind will be answered in the rest of the talk. So, as I mentioned, this has led me to find zero-day vulnerabilities. So overall, I found 4 different zero-day vulnerabilities in 6 different vulnerable products. The products are Microsoft Defender, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, SentinelOne EDR, Trend Micro Apex One, Avast Antivirus, and AVG Antivirus. If we'll take a look at the graph on the right by Gartner for the endpoint protection platforms in 2021, we can see that actually 3 out of the 5 vendors that I just listed are high up in the leader square. That's also huge. These are the CVEs which were granted as a result of the vulnerabilities. So Microsoft has issued 1 CVE for both Defender and Defender for Endpoint because apparently they share the same vulnerable code. Vulnerable code to the vulnerability that I found. SentinelOne has confirmed the vulnerability and released the fix, but I was not granted the CVE yet. And regarding the Avast and AVG products, apparently they share a mutual vendor, which is Gen as well. And I was given only 1 CVE for both of them too, because it was the same vulnerable code in both of the products. I do have a little disclaimer regarding the Windows Defender products vulnerabilities, and that is that in the exploit I found for them, then I was able only to delete almost any directory that I want on the computer and not any file that I want in the computer. But if we're talking about wipers, that, as you know, a wiper does not really care about deleting a few files on the way. So if I wanted to delete a certain file, I could just delete its directory. And now to the first demo that I'm going to show you here. So I have another demo layer with the wiper itself. And in this demo, we'll see the exploitation itself of the vulnerability that I found in the Windows Defender products with the attempt of deleting all the drivers from the drivers directory. So let's take a look. So here you can see, I'm showing you the drivers that exist in the normal drivers directory in the operating system. Then we can see that I'm running as a user called limited, and limited belongs to the unprivileged users group. Now I'm creating a directory called temp, and inside I'm creating the directory is Windows System 32. Then I'm creating a malicious file called drivers inside and holding the handle to it open. Then I'm asking Defender to scan that path and delete the malicious file just to rush the process. And yes, this can be done as an unprivileged user. Now, Defender should soon give up. And now it's safe to close the handle because the deletion was postponed. We can delete the temp directory, instead create a junction that is called temp2, point it towards the C drive, reboot the computer, and let's see what happens. So we can see that most of the drivers were gone because Defender iterated through all the drivers, tried to delete them one by one until it encountered one that it can't, so it stopped. And then after the next reboot, the operating system is no longer bootable. So we managed to make the system unbootable as an unprivileged user and delete drivers which are system files. This exploit is also effective against a ransomware protection feature, which was developed by Microsoft. And this feature is called the controlled folder access. This feature basically prevents untrusted processes from modifying or deleting any files or directories that are contained inside one of the folders inside the protected folders list. But in our exploit, the entity that deletes files and directories, no matter if it's Defender or any other product, is actually the most trusted entity on the computer. So the controlled folder access feature is not going to prevent the most trusted entity on the computer from deleting any file. So that is effective against this protection feature as well. Overall, I tested 11 different products, and 6 of the products were found to be vulnerable. That's more than 50%. Not only that, I was just unable to force the other products to postpone the deletion to after the next reboot. So I guess that if you find a way to do that, these products will be vulnerable too. So we should really encourage those EDR vendors, and I really encourage you to try and find more vulnerabilities of that kind before real attackers do. And now to the actual Aikido wiper tool. So I implemented it to work against SentinelOne, Defender, and Defender for Endpoint, just because they were the most consistent with the exploit and easiest to implement. The wiper is able to make the system unbootable, just like we saw in the demo where it deleted drivers. The wiper is fully undetectable because it deletes files using the most trusted entity on the system, as I mentioned, and the EDR on the antivirus is not going to prevent itself from deleting any file on the system, especially if it thinks that it's malicious. In order to minimize the noise of the creation of a malicious file by the wiper also creates a car instead of a real malicious file. So that's an improvement for the wiper. The wiper is able to run with the permissions of an unprivileged user, like we wanted in the first place. And the wiper is able to delete important files from all users. And in the second demo, I will also show you the wiper runs against the SentinelOne EDR with an attempt to delete a whole administrator directory. But if you remember, in the beginning of the talk, I mentioned that there is actually a difference between a deletion and a wipe. And what I achieved by now was only deletion. So I needed to overcome this somehow. And this was actually pretty simple. All I needed to do is just to implement the feature that after the wiper, that after the operating system reboots and the wiper runs again, it just fills up the free space on the disk with random bytes to no space at all. And by that, it makes sure that it overwrites whatever file contents which were left on the disk after they were deleted. I also made sure with 2 popular tools, Clever Files Disk Drill and CCleaner Recuva file recovery tools, that they were able to recover some of the files before I inserted this feature, but after I implemented this feature, they were not able to recover any files whatsoever. I'm also quite sure that some of you have thought about the option of the quarantine directory. What about the quarantine directory? What if that's the default configuration for the EDR to quarantine the file and not delete it? So the solution for that was actually pretty simple as well. All I needed to do is to mark the quarantine directory with the same exploits for deletion as well. And then the EDR and the antiviruses realized that they can't quarantine the quarantine directory. So the quarantine directory was just deleted as well. So anytime the wiper wants to wipe something, it just marks the quarantine directory for deletion as well. I documented all the functions in the repository of the wiper. I wanted it to be clear as possible. I invested some time in its design, so it's not just a huge script. So you really have my invitation to go inside the repo, download it, clone it, fork it, and find more vulnerabilities to help us patch them before real attackers do. So I'll give you a minute to scan the QR code or take a picture of the URL. You can also just look up Aikido wiper on Google, and one of the first results is the repository on GitHub. So I'll give you a few more seconds. Okay. And now to the second demo I promised you with the actual wiper in action against the SentinelOne EDR. In this demo, we'll see the wiper runs with an attempt to delete an administrator directory running as an unprivileged user. So here the demo starts. Well, we are logged in as an admin, and I'm showing you that the admin has files in its default libraries. So we can see that this is really an administrator. It belongs to the administrator group. And now we're switching to the limited user again. Now, just to make sure, again, this is the limited user, and it belongs to the unprivileged users group. Now to the downloads directory, we have the wiper in here. We're asking from the wiper to do proxy deletion for all user data of the user admin. We can see that the admin's directory is there in the user's directory. Now we're running the wiper. The wiper automatically detects the SentinelOne installed EDR, exploits the right vulnerability, marks the quarantine directory for deletion as well. And let's see what happens. The admin directory is fully gone. All the files from the libraries of the admin were deleted. And we can also see that the disk is starting to fill up with data. And this is done because the wiper was ran after the reboot. So let's just see in task manager that it's there. Great. So this is it in the demo. Now, to sum it all up, what did we learn today? So, a wiper or any other malicious malware, for that case, is much more dangerous if it uses a trusted entity like an EDR or an antivirus to do its malicious actions. Now, for the 1,000th times, please, having security controls does not really mean that you are secure. So please keep validating your security controls every day. Lastly, security controls like EDRs and antivirus might be a very preferred target for an attacker because they have very high privileges and they have a very high trust level. I do have some vendor responses in here from Microsoft and Jen, the vendor of the Avast and AVG products, but I won't read them to you because they are pretty long. So overall, they were very collaborative, and I had no other issues with them. They all fixed the vulnerabilities. these are the versions that you want to make sure you're updated to in order to be safe from the vulnerabilities. So in Microsoft, it's the malware protection engine, which is shared between the Defender and Defender for Endpoint products. SentinelOne has not shared, unfortunately, a fixed version yet, but as far as I know, they have released one. Trend Micro have released a patch and not an updated version. So please make sure that you have the patch installed. And for the Avast and AVG products, they're both in the same version, and that is what you can see in this slide 22.10. I also want to thank Shmuel Cohen, which is a team member of mine, for the assistance with testing my exploits against different EDR products. And this is pretty much it. We can move on to the Q&A session.
Perfect. So we do have a couple of questions that have been received. First question is, do I understand correctly that the antivirus erases the contents of the file and not the entry in the MFT?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So no, it does not erase the content of the file. I see that this question was deleted, but I'll answer it anyways. Okay. So it does not delete the contents of the file. It deletes the file like a normal user deletes a file. But in order, again, to overcome the gap which is left after the deletion between a deletion and a wipe, the wiper fills up the disk to no space at all with random bytes for a few times to make sure that any file contents which were left on the disk are overridden by random bytes. So the wiper does achieve full wipe.
Thank you. Second question is, this approach can only delete files whose full path is known. If the administrator files are not readable, you cannot specify them as target for a wiper running with the user rights. Or is it possible to use a mask of all files for a folder?
So it is possible to mention files that are not readable for an unprivileged user. It is possible to mention them for the wiper. You just need to know that they are there. Just need to know their path, but you don't need to be able to read them.
Just a reminder, if anybody does want to submit any questions for Or about his research, please use the Q&A function to submit your Q&A. Since there are no more questions, thank you again, Or, for this really enriching presentation. And thank you everyone for taking the time to join our presentation and learn more about this original research from Or and the Safe Breach Labs team. Again, have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.